Elizabeth Stead was not a lewd girl. Quite the contrary. Brazel had to hang his cap many times on the antlers in the hall before she would consent to sit on his knee. With his fingertip he touched her lips and throat, saying, "Only this far." And she said, "Yes." Only after a week of such restraint would she consent to show him her bedroom. A squat oaken wardrobe reached to the low ceiling. A couple of dressing tables stood against one wall. A double bed took up most of the room. A bedside table with a fringed cloth held 3 brushes and as many combs. A Norwegian trinket jar, a rosary. Everything was very tidy. A low window looked down on a vista of trees. This was where Elizabeth slept, as if on the bright scalloped bottom of a coral sea. Only after much persuasion would she consent to sit with him on the bed, saying, "Only here, only on my mouth. Now do you hear?" So that phase passed. Then, unable to curb Mr. Brazel, she consented to remove her stockings and skirt and lay in the semi-darkness in her girdle, saying, "Only this far." Calm as fishes, they lay side by side, watching the reflections of the boughs thrown on the low ceiling, a pale susurration of agitated light. Once she complained, "Your hand is like an old claw." And once she said, "I am the most ignorant person alive." And once, "Oh, for the love of God, get out and leave me alone." But by that time, reduced to less than her shift, she was already fighting a losing battle. For after she had said that, she consented, some weeks after the original "only this far," to the removal of the last impediment, the girdle, saying, "Oh, fig." But this was to happen on a night full of unseemly behaviour, and in Beverley Mount, in Mr. Brazel's arms, in the latter's dark brown bed. Moreover, that night was to see the end of more than one oppressive dream. Brazel, in his pursuit of the siren Stead, had not been paying too much attention to Mr. Butcher's nightly discourses, a continual paying out of the line which by its monotony and regularity had long ceased to hold his attention, so that he failed to notice the point at which the strike was made, failed to notice that the line was coming in now fast, hand over hand. So profound was his ignorance, his unbelief. So perfect was his non-participation that when it all came out, he could not even comprehend that the other had used him as bait all along. No, he could not even fathom that. On the last day in the church, on his knees, when he had prayed, "Dear God, let my ignorance be less complete." Not even an articulated prayer at that, but merely a motion of fear in his heart, blood turning over as it were in a flurry, the feeling that the survivor must have as he stands by the fatal accident. Even then he could not fathom it or tell when it began. Brazel did not realize that anything was wrong, or that behind the Christ-like parables used by his employers something was stirring. And even when all his talk was of worms and disease, Brazel was impervious still, and with an almost total blankness in the face of the other's suffering, such being the birthright of the poor in heart. Brazel had never come into contact with the insane, so that to the end he sat on cushions of fatigue and despair and watched, almost with equanimity, Mr. Boucher's mind giving way. One evening, during Brazel's courting days, Mr. Butcher sank down in his chair with a cold pipe in his mouth and opened his mouth to say this: "You are the man who stands in the door of life, scraping his boots on the mat. Never mind, Brazel. Wait until the tying of a bootlace costs you a great effort, and regret that. No, regret nothing. Don't regret failure, the failure of the body least of all. With what brutish honesty we persist in claiming our due. Oh, it's sickening, sickening. But the established failure, who in his rashness or wisdom has put himself outside the beneficial scheme of things, he is a happy man. Nothing is more disgusting than the sight of the conformable citizen striding forward to his just reward, surrounded by wife, issue, dependents, with the light that comes from a difficult task well performed shining in his eye. No pride in bounden duty, be it performed well or be it performed ill, can offer a satisfactory answer to the pain we feel sometimes, here and here, in the sacrum and the joints, in the wretched hang of the limbs. The remorse, in a word, of the entire organism's unwillingness to continue with this farce much longer. Don't we feel it already in our faces, across the bridge of the nose and in the sockets of the eyes? There it is for you, the posthumous pressure of the bone. Then we die, and marvellous to relate, the coffin is exactly right for us. Brazel found he could offer no satisfactory answer to this austere philosophy, and contented himself with saying nothing. "Sooner or later," said Mr. Butcher, "we all come to rest in the ruins of ourselves, so we should try to get there with the least presumption. Now, you pretend not to understand, but you do, better than myself. The world's full of cranks. Think of the woman who wanted to be buried wearing her blue underwear in her own fowl run, or the other who laid a wreath every year at Valentino's grave and began her own death there. To be all day first dressing one's body, then dragging it abroad, then stuffing the guts, then washing them with tea, then wagging... Oh, no, it's gone on too long. Have you, or has anyone for that matter, determined that point in time where the bludgeon waits for each one of us? Perhaps the weapon has been chosen, the time and site selected. Well, that lies before us. As a Christian, you must believe it, Brazel. Look here. In the 1820s, a young poet, unknown to himself, was dying in Schmiel in Rome. He feared to visit the opera because he'd been there once and got the fright of his life. He imagined the sentinels who stood aloof from the action, holding spears, were visible to him alone. They were the powers, infernal or divine, come to claim his immortal soul. Ah, you may smile, boy, you may smile, but let me tell you this. He was dead within a month. So are we, perhaps unknown to ourselves, walking under the shadow of an upraised arm. One good dot will finish the job. So much for us. Do what we can, our progress in the end will be just another bit of time pushed to the side. We must be suspicious of everybody. Those who feel they're in a position to call themselves our close friends and who believe themselves indispensable to us, avoid them. You hear? Unless we stand out alone without encumbrances, we may be struck down with our mouths open, and a pretty sight that will be for the survivors. Here Brazel crossed his legs and grunted. Lifting up La Roche-Moussol's Maxims, Mr. Boucher, who was a professed atheist and enjoyed private means, continued reading. The books that Brazel let fall from his grasp as he dozed had titles like Clubfoot the Avenger, O Daughter of Babylon by Francis Dale, and an illustrated serial which ran wild with italics. Sheena ran sobbing, I won't go home again. Will the 20-pound policeman bring his daughter back by force? Brazel had relapsed back into his sleep again. The clock hand stood at 9:20, as they had stood every day since this new lodger's arrival. Twin forked stains stretched across the carpet where, on successive nights, first Brazel and then Mr. Butcher had accidentally spilled Indian ink. The dry sounds of the palms came fidgeting from outside the window. Outside, the town of Stye lay sleeping.